Welcome everybody. Tonight we're tasting Waubs Harbour Whisky all the way from Tasmania. I'm pretty excited about this one. I wasn't supposed to be doing tonight. It's supposed to be Anton who does all the Australian stuff, and he kind of called in. He's not well, and I said, "Oh, you know what? I really kind of wanted to learn about this distillery anyway, and I'm supposed to have five-a-side football tonight, so it's means that I don't need to go and do any sport or run out of energy. So, and instead, I'm now sitting here tasting whiskey with everybody else. So I'm pretty happy about that. And like I said, done a bit of a write-up about this distillery, and also sort of looked at some pictures. Obviously, the picture behind me looks amazing, and I'd love to visit here. This is definitely a distillery is now on my list to visit. And probably by the end of tonight, I'm probably going to be even more excited about it after tasting the whiskey and also learning about it. So what we're going to do tonight is just go through the five whiskies. We'll go over them again. It's new make spirit first, and then what did we say? We said the original. Yeah, it's the only one I don't have, so that's what I've got to get there. The port, the Founder's Reserve, and the limited edition. So yeah. So we'll go through those ones in that order. Feel free to chuck your questions in the chat, your tasting notes in the chat. We're more than happy to go through all those questions with you. If there's loads going on, obviously, it's hard to keep up. Chuck the question in again if we've not answered it. We'll try and do our best to do that. But try and keep in touch with us, and we'll try and make this a really good interactive tasting as much as possible. I've just recently been shown the distillery outside by these guys, and hopefully they'll do the same for you before it gets dark there. But I'll pass you over to Tim, and he'll introduce his partner in crime, and they'll tell us a bit about themselves, and then we'll take it from there. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, hi, guys. I'm Tim, and this is Rob. G'day. Yeah, it's so good to be here with you guys tonight. Exciting times. We haven't done that many. I mean, we're a newish distillery, so we actually haven't done many online tastings as such. We've certainly talked a lot about whiskey in our time, but we just haven't done the kind of online format. So this is cool. We're brothers. I don't know how much you guys have looked into our story in the past, but yeah, we're brothers. Rob's the head distiller, and I do more of the sort of outside of the bottle, I suppose, the business sort of side of it and the marketing side. But yeah, Rob does all the inside of the bottle and has a solid background in making whiskey, actually, coming from Overeem Whisky in the past and Lark Distillery as well. So when we started Waubs Harbour 5 years ago, it's hard to believe it's been 5 years already, but it's been 5 years or longer. But really, we had this vision, and it was all about the fact that we loved making Tasmanian whiskey. Rob had that pedigree of making some of the great existing Tassie whiskies. But some of our favourite whiskies from around the world, especially these classics from Scotland in the Isla region, and we were just talking to Craig before, one of our favourites as well is the Old Pulteney spirit, and that was something that we just love the idea of doing in Tasmania and Australia, because especially considering Tasmania is surrounded by pretty wild like a maritime environment. And so we just love the idea of pairing great maritime sort of whiskey with Tasmanian, nice, rich and oily spirit, and seeing what we could produce. Yeah, so day one, 5 years ago, we set out to try to find ourselves a place where we could do that, a provenance that was really authentically maritime and, had all that classic sort of sailing and maritime nature about it. And what we found here right on the coast of Tasmania was pretty special, an old oyster hatchery and an old abalone farm right next door to each other. And we've been able to get hold of both buildings. And today we've got a full-on production set up. We've got probably 900 barrels maturing, all within a stone's throw. In fact, many of them literally within 10 meters, 20 meters from the ocean. And we've got we make all the wash ourselves. We'll go into this more, no doubt, but we've even got an on-site cooperage these days. So we're all about making, and you know, we're all about not shortcutting anything in the whiskey production process. So yeah, Rob will talk no doubt more about that in the down the track, but I just wanted to introduce, I guess, the reason why we're here. I think it'd be cool as well, maybe to get to show them. I'll just spin the laptop around and just show you where we are in the building here. Here we go. I'll try doing this. So we're in our tasting room, it's called, which is a nice little spot. You can see our bench behind us, which we're leaning up against. And this is where we run a lot of tours and tastings and that sort of thing, or where we finish. But we're actually, we're looking. You guys have got the poor end of the view. When you're looking at us, we've got a much better view. We're looking at, kind of what is over the shoulder of Craig in your photo, Craig. It's the wild ocean. Do you want to open those doors there, Rob? And I'll just pop out. We overlook, in this building, what's sort of in Craig's picture there. So we're looking at the distillery production, and you can probably not really see it, but the stills are over there. You can see the silo, the grain silo. This building next to me here, which is full of barrels. But yeah, it's a pretty special, remote and rugged kind of wild spot.
So are these new buildings or are these renovated
all
buildings?
Old buildings. So yeah, I'm just spinning around here, looking the other way. But yeah, it's all old buildings. They're about 70 years plus, and they were started their lives as in the aquaculture kind of game. It was all about oysters and abalone here. And so it's sort of changed industry, and we've been lucky enough to be able to pick up these buildings and convert them. We've done a lot of the renovations ourselves, actually, but we really wanted to keep the kind of rustic charm about these old buildings. They literally were quite perfect for a whiskey distillery because all the floors were sloping grates. So when it came to, having a brew house, and even where the stills are and that sort of thing, we've got this, some great fundamentals of what you need when you've got concrete everywhere and drainage and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's been pretty fun converting it into a whiskey distillery.
Good. Looks great. It's obviously a hard place to work. I mean, every day, the smell of the sea, etc. Is a lot of fishing in the area then because of that, or is that all gone?
Yeah, there is. I mean, in the past, it's been much bigger for fishing. It was a commercial fishing industry here where there was, there'd be 30 plus crayfishing fishing boats, commercial boats, moored right in front of us here. But over time, that's kind of diminished, and today there's only a few. And so, yeah, the industry's changed. It's still great fishing here recreationally. In fact, the crayfishing season's just started up a few days ago. Right. And that's something that we get right into. I go out every morning before work in my little tinny that's parked just on the jetty down there and check the pots in the morning. And because we've got an old abalone farm, we've got these old live saltwater tanks in the buildings. So we're able to keep these saltwater tanks running and go down, check the pot, get a crayfish and pop him straight into the saltwater tank and go into work and make whiskey. It's a pretty dreamy lifestyle.
Certainly seems like it. It's amazing. Yeah. Incredible. Is those barrels behind you, are they for sure? Are they actually full?
These ones actually are more show. You know how there's a lot of regulation these days, and we're in the actual tasting room where we've got people. So gone are the days where you can sort of just have bulk storage of something hazardous like this right in the face of people. So no, these are actually empty right behind us. But yeah, there's a lot of full barrels. We've got a mix. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into this down the track, but we've got a real mixed size of barrels here. Yeah. 50 or sort of 60 litres is our minimum sort of size barrel that we've made here. And then, yeah, we've got a lot of hundreds and 200 litres and bigger than that as well.
Right. Fantastic. So I guess why tell us a little bit about how it all started, and I mean maybe we should talk about the new make first, I guess. I'll get us into
Let's
it.
get Robbie to the accent. He loves talking about new make spirit. Yeah. He can get very well. One of the things about Rob as well is he did a master's in marine science, so he does get very technical. So if anyone needs to chuck in the chat, like maybe we have a sound or a warning, sort of like, Rob, you're going over my head here with your technical.
Yeah.
That's all right. See how far we can go with it.
Yeah.
I mean, we can have a look at this as you go. But I think that one of the best parts to the new make and what we're trying to do here is just that initial vision and aim, as in what Tim talked about just before. And we've come to this site and we've found the ultimate location to make that maritime whiskey. And my history says I know how to make Tasmanian single malt quite well within Overeem, of course, and then at Lark, you sort of pick up what the hallmarks of the industry are, tasting a lot of spirit down there. Then when you come here and you're trying to create that maritime overlay, you really got to look at things from like the base level, from say the raw ingredient barley itself and what we're trying to push across in our make spirit. So the new make has all Tasmanian barley for a start. Like that's a bit of a core one for us. If it's not Tasmanian barley, we don't want it in our product. We need it to stand out as Tasmanian. The other parts to it are just a little bit in the brewing technique and fermentation in particular, because it's something that within my microbiology degree, there's a big crossover between chemistry and sort of like the biology within inside of fermenter. And so just trying to chase flavour through fermentation manipulation really, and pitching the right yeast and the type of yeast, just stressing it to the right point so that you're creating those flavours. And that way I can sort of chase that maritime flavour. So within the spirit after distillation in particular, I'm trying to get, obviously no off notes. I don't want to bring across any faints. I don't want to bring across any pores. I don't want that acetone. I don't want peppery heat from hot ferments or anything like that. So we've got things like jacketed fermenters to stop that. But then looking at this particular new make spirit, the yeast in this one is M1, and that gives you a pretty good apple sort of flavour. But you can sort of, within distillation technique and within the fermentation, if you get the right temperatures, then you can really get a nice apple cream note to it, and you don't get that sharp peppery note that can dominate. The other thing I like to chase in this is that the maritime flavour is that sort of salinity or a brininess almost. There's a bit of a herbaceous note to it, and I think that comes a little bit from the fermentation, but more to do with actually the manipulation of the stills, how I use those, control those. The stills that we've got are a squat still from Naplua, like Peter Bailey, that makes stills in Tasmania. And he makes a sort of like a squatter style still. So you pull across a lot of oils, but across as well a little bit of that metallic herbaceous note because it's so short. But if you run it just right, it doesn't dominate or overpower the spirit, but you get the oiliness. So there's a little bit there for you to take in, but it's the reasons why we're trying to get to this point to then put into the barrel to sort of amp up that maritime Tasmanian notes that you want to see. So it's like, for me, it's that raw barley, apple, cream, and the maritime salinity.
I'm a big fan of the oiliness that we get out of that, that viscosity, that texture. Yeah, always love it tasting our new make spirit with people because it's really interesting.
And it's sometimes, if you've not got that oiliness, you tend to find that it's too warm in the palate, and you make, with the oiliness kind of just coats and it kind of hides that warmth a little bit and allows you to taste way more, and just on the palate it just sits around for a little bit longer, which it does. It's like, it just graces the mouth for a bit.
Especially considering it's 63 0.4%. You know, that's strong, and yet a very palatable new make. There's you know, like we often get reviews that are just talking about how easy it could be to bottle and sell this as is, which is not in our interest, but it is a starting point for what I've achieved, which is that, like exactly what you're talking about, that oiliness that cuts through the peppery notes.
Yeah. Yeah, Andrew said grasp, crisp green apple, viscous. Yeah, definitely. Like it's got that grassy note to it, that sort of floralness to it, which is beautiful. I was just telling the guys, like my first ever whiskey in Scotland was Polmear, and it got me into whiskey. And I think I was 15 years old at the time. My uncle sort of giving me this whiskey, and sort of you remember it your whole life, and you tend to, that's the distillery that you go with for the rest of your life and critiquing. And I sat down with George, the rep, that helps these guys on the mainland, and he basically let me taste this whiskey, and it sort of took me back to that, and straight away, and I hadn't tasted the new make, but I just had this part of it where it was like, it was very similar but not the same, you know. And I think it was that oiliness, that viscousness of it, a little bit of green apple. It was very good, you know. And it just thought, oh, it's the whiskey that's going to come, you know, out of this distillery is just going to keep getting better, you know, because they're going to be able to play with that beautiful new make. So
yeah, sometimes create a new make just to expand upon it. Like we do use a bunch of different yeasts. I culture yeast from scratch. I can either capture it from the wild, or I can import it from internationally, or whatever it be. But usually the rarer it is pretty much because it's very difficult to produce and move it around. So it might need to be a liquid culture stored at a certain temperature, so it's not commercially viable. So I've been able to put that in the lab and take it through. And you often will choose a yeast strain to choose a new make style. So this new make at the moment that we're trying is that apple cream style, but I've got new makes that would be more like on the chocolate orange Jaffa style, as in completely different really. And the way in which you can use those into the next step into the barrel is just another level of creativity really there, that you've got another tool to the tool belt where you can really hone in on what type of new make would go best with which barrel.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, brilliant. Mike said, would it be weird or wrong if I said maybe some Mandarin in there? It's brilliant, guys.
Yeah, definitely.
Andrew's saying that yes, like an oily mouthfeel is definitely what we're after. It's something that we personally love. It's something that Tasmania's kind of character has become sort of a little bit known for. So everything we do with our equipment and our cask selection, that sort of thing, is definitely to enhance that. Yeah,
brilliant. Yeah, I mean, and it's funny when I don't know if some people on here tonight that haven't been on many online tastings, or but it's funny that you put a tasting note on there that you taste, and sometimes it just triggers it in somebody's mind and say, oh, you know, now I taste that because you're telling me I taste, like it should be in there. So, and yeah, you basically write down what you think on these tasting notes, because yeah, it could be something that you get and we don't get, but it's maybe just kind of deep down in that palate. You got to go looking for it a little bit more. Yeah, terrific. Yeah, brilliant. And I guess after that, it's all about the casks.
Yeah. So we've got a bunch of different casks that we choose from, different suppliers, different coopers. We predominantly use bourbon, Australian Apera, as in Australian sherry, or Australian port or tawnies. That's typically what we use for the majority of our stock. We use a bunch of different sizes, so from 50 litres up to 300. Often the bourbons are in 225s, or 200s. A lot of the wine casks, like ex-fortifieds, are 225s or 300s. And sometimes we get those cut down into 100s or 50-litre casks, depending on the requirements. Should we try the next Waubs Original? Is it too far to go into that? But
Yeah,
If we
Right.
pour out Waubs Original,
How's it
then
work?
I can start talking a little bit about what
Yeah.
this one's made up of,
Yeah.
for an example. So the Waubs Original is our entry, a 43% whiskey and predominantly bourbon. And so when I was talking about some of the bourbon casks that we use, these ones are 50-litre casks predominantly out of, we get them from TCC, which is Cask Co. That's where we were getting these particular casks, and they come from mostly Heaven Hill distilleries, or within the group of those guys. And so sometimes there's Wild Turkey or Buffalo Trace, and there's a raft of different bourbons that can make up these. But it's basically a softer style that we're trying to use bourbon so that it doesn't over influence that new make spirit. You want maturity, and you want some of the nice sweet sugar characteristics of the bourbon, but you don't want it to just overlay completely all of the work within that new make. There's also in this a little bit of tawny, which is only about 10% of the recipe, but it's important for development of the finish. Really, it's a bit of back palate. It's a little thing just to sort of bring you back to the whiskey, so you get this nice, fresh, vibrant, almost like a salted caramel. I think of when I'm going for the nose and having a little taste from that bourbon, and as well the maturation conditions. And then it sort of, you get some of that, just the malt characteristics coming through, that raw barley, but it's transformed a little bit through maturation. I get a little bit of citrus actually as well there.
Citrus, yep.
And then as it just washes over the palate, it's very drinkable, very sessionable. That without going too much into it, you can just you could have a few of these without really thinking too much. There's enough there if you want to dive in, because it's starting to get to that part where in the back part of the finish where I'm getting that soft tawny, that little bit of raisin fruit that comes through. It's almost a bit pear-like actually for me tonight, like almost like dried pears. But yeah, it's a really delicious, well-rounded whiskey that's really hallmark for us, a style that we're trying to show that maritime Tasmanian quality.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people just love the classic vanillas and caramels and stuff as you get in out of an ex-bourbon cask. And a lot of our casks, Rob goes to the effort of doing a lot of rejuvenation for, so we're not just first filling these bourbon casks, he's doing work beforehand.
Oh yes, yeah. So for instance, like some of the casks, if we get them cut down to 50 litres or 100, or if they're even at 225, if we get the Cooper on site or one of our Coopers, we've got a couple in Tassie and a couple on the mainland, that we'll resize, shave, toast and char to our specifications. Usually I like to go for a deep toast, a light shave and a light to medium char. The aim there is really all about, I don't want to take away too much of the flavour out of that barrel that's existing with a shave. I'm just doing it something light to usually take off either the tartrates of a fortified or the char layer of a bourbon. And I just want to, when I'm toasting, I just want to caramelise that wood sugar all the way through the stave so that you get a nice deep penetration of heat. And then the last char, I don't want to leave too much char in there, like a heavy char that sort of strips a lot of the flavour from your actual new make. I kind of want to leave that in there a little bit, and just sort of let it all work together with maturity. The interesting part about maturity in Waubs Harbour is just the proximity to the ocean, I'd say, is the main one, where you've got this big influence of the coastline on the product. And it might be temperature related, which you think in Tassie or Australia it's quite hot and cold at certain times, but actually when you're so close to the sea, the ocean acts as a massive buffer and the temperature is actually quite stable. It's almost like a little mini microclimate just in this little area. You find that all across the coastline. There's this other thing is we all know about sea breezes, the afternoon heat, so it draws up that sea breeze, so it blows off all that temperature off the distillery in the afternoon. So you just don't get those big highs and those big lows. So you don't get a frost down near the ocean as well. And those temperature things are something, they make a big difference. There's the pressure that makes a big difference. So like as in ambient pressure, that really just is to do with the weather patterns that kind of circulate Tasmania. They come through the Bass Strait and drop down the Tasman Sea, just past our little part of Tassie. And that quick drop or sudden change in pressure means the barrels are high pressure still inside the barrel, or can be low pressure, but basically the outside of the barrel is dropping or increasing very quickly. And you see pushing and pulling in that barrel. Sometimes you pull the bung and it pops, and sometimes it sucks. And you can see it actively working, especially in this coastal zone, that pressure difference. You can see that offshore storm. And as well, the humidity plays a big part as well. Like you get very humid days, especially when it's like a northeasterly that's just pushing across the distillery. The salt air that comes off of the ocean, the wind sort of laps it up and it kind of mists the salt air and it pushes it over the distillery, and the salt sort of sticks on everything. It sticks on your car window. It goes up in under your car. Your car doesn't last very long on the coast. And it kind of, it creates a little bit of a humidity thing as well, where you get these high humid days. They're the best days in the bond store, because the high humidity means that it's like the aroma just sticks around. You enter the bond store in the morning and you get that big waft of tawny, and it's a good smell. Yeah, I think that the trio of those three things is the main ones: the temperature, the pressure, and humidity. And then as well, that other extra angle that's going on, which I don't usually like to force too much, but when you look in the distillery, you often see, you can't quite see it today because we're in the wrong angle, but the tops of the barrels have got a settled sort of salt layer on the top, and on the bottom they don't. And you can see that the rings or the hoops, they rust on the top but not on the bottom. And it gets through all of our gear. So like you kind of, at first we'll keep it out because it's really detrimental to all our gear. But then in the end, it turns out that it's actually a big part of why we're here, and it sort of just gets in, and good and bad. It's
yeah, we embrace that saltiness. We've had to repaint a silo, which is galvanized steel base, to our silo that holds 30 tons worth of grain, malted barley outside. But the bottom, the ring around the bottom, which is a galvanized steel base, we've painted now probably nearly 5 times. It's been 4 times, which is just crazy. It just, everything just rusts here. But yeah, like Rob said, it's the bane. Yeah, it's even the stainless. It's the bane of our lives, but it's also the very character and reason why we wanted to be here. And maturing, barrels here. Barrels porous, of course. Like it's the oak is breathing. It's like Rob was talking about, with air pressure drops and rises and falls. It's pushing and pulling, and it's we're losing that evaporation, that angel share. At the same time, it's pulling the outside air in, and we're finding that some of our flavors within, and some of those like raisins even turning into that sort of, kind of enhances it. And I guess that's how we like to think of, there's definitely there's a brininess element, but we also find that sort of saline environment enhances different flavors, much like when you're using seasoning in cooking, or even when you're using saline solution in making cocktails, and it's all about enhancing flavors. So when you're adding salt to your potatoes in the oven, it's not about making a salty potato. It's actually about enhancing those flavors in those roast vegetables. And we see that in our whiskey, how it changes different things. In fact, it might be, it can balance out a sweetness to be a bit more savory. And so it's an interesting element to add into the flavor profile.
Definitely is. It's that's what else I was going to ask about the salt. You know, do you get a lot of moisture on top of the barrels then? Do you see a lot of moisture sitting on top of it, or does that salt just soak it all up?
It's interesting when that salt sort of, yeah, it does soak it up. There is a moisture in those certain days where that humidity is very high in the air, and you can kind of, you know, I'm just trying to think of an example where there is a salt layer on things, and it kind of like wicks almost. It kind of wicks the humidity out of the air, and it kind of droplet forms almost. And then when the humidity leaves, obviously it recrystallizes. It's an interesting thing, and there was a question in there about angel share, and I think that settling of the salt on top of the barrel does make a difference to things like angel share. It almost, I have no quantitative evidence for this, but as in it's the salt is there, and I do have high angel share. It's something like 20% of the life of the barrel. So even if it was a 50 litre or 100 litre, it's nearly 20% over the course of its life in maturation, which isn't necessarily a massive drop in some ways, but more to the salt content on the top. The interesting part is how the ABV actually goes up over time, which is interesting because you don't usually see that. Usually it's dropping, which means that more water is leaving that barrel than normal. And so is that a coastal effect? That's what I'm led to believe at this point, because that's the distilleries that I've worked in would usually, inland distilleries, drop. So it's not the only cause, but it's certainly something on my radar to be looking at.
Yeah. Do you find then, Rob, I don't know if you can answer it or not, but from being at Lark, do you find that you can do more experiments, etc. here doing this now, or did you find it's just the same? Like, or are you just open to doing whatever you want now at Waubs?
Yeah, there's different tiers of experimentation at both places. So Lark have an excellent barrel sourcing ability, and they have access to some of the best Australian fortifieds out there, just because of their length in the time in the industry and relations that they've forged. And so they can come across some excellent stock. I've got also some great relationships in that area. But one of the things that I didn't experiment on while I was at Lark was my yeast regime. A lot of fermentation stuff that I do. Not to say that they don't do that, because they do things like open top ferment, wild yeast stuff as well. But I've just sort of taken the theory and the knowledge that I have to the next level in that category. The other part that is the constrictor is that most or all of the products, unless it's something completely wild, and luckily because we're owned by ourselves, we can make the call, do you want to do it or not? As in, we don't have a board to be responsible to. We can just do it, but usually what we're trying to do is aim within the Waubs maritime Tasmanian whiskey brief. So that might be like, we like to use local products preferentially over other international import barrels, for instance, or it might be a barley thing. So some of the experimentals as well, we like to do peated whiskies. So we're using, I was pretty firm on not wanting to import Scottish peated whiskey or peated malt or peat in general. And at Lark, we had peated or peat from the Highlands. Or when at Waubs, we've got peat from the marshlands close to us, which is coastal marshlands. It's an intertidal zone where the salt water meets the fresh water, and it sort of tidally interchanges, and you get this completely different ecosystem every 100 meters up the coast, and you get this new plant life litter base that you can dig into as an actual peat, and you can burn those, and the different compositions create different flavors, especially because the way in which the weathering of the salt and the fresh water that sort of pushes and pulls through it over the tidal sequence, you get this leaching of all that tanniny sort of material that you don't want in a peat, that gives it like a real astringency or a real bitterness that in in the peat that I've got here, it's much more nutty and earthy. It's a completely different style. So experimenting in those areas is a big part of like staying on brand for what we're doing.
Yeah, I think it's a good point too. Like, just to finish on that, we're quite traditional in our style of making whiskey. So I know that, you know, New World whiskey, like we're in Australia, we've got more of a license to be innovative and experimental and all that sort of thing. But we're still personally quite traditional in how we like to do single malt whiskey. So we don't like to be innovative just for the sake of it, for a marketing story or something. We're pretty straight down the line with how we do things. For instance, peated whiskey, we're just doing it in a Tasmanian provenance style. So salt, a salt marshland just down, 10 kilometres down the road, rather than importing Scottish peat. It was a super important thing for us. So and the Rob's experimentation with the yeast side of things, like culturing his own live yeasts, being able to import different yeasts from around the place and then grow them. But also the more exciting side that I love is the literally finding different yeasts from around the place, like literally swabbing seaweed or something, or his beehives that he has at home, that sort of thing, and then actually experimenting on a really small scale. Like he's got his little, Portuguese stills, like, the little tiny 5 litre style ones where he's doing a little small ferment and then a distillation, and lots of little experiments before actually committing to a proper full production run of yeast. But yeah, that's an exciting part of what we're up to. None of which, by the way, has been released yet, and neither is the peat. Both of those are in barrel, and so watch that space.
Yeah, sounds interesting. It's I like the idea of, like, I used to be a chef years ago, and I always like the ideas of a lot of the big restaurants, a lot of the big chefs that we know now always work for some of the big hotels, or a big chef that in the past, and they've just learned how to do every little bit, every little thing, every little ingredient properly, and really learn that way to, like you said, traditionally making something, and then they go away and they just make these slight little touches of difference to it. And that's generally what people like the best. They're not taking it too far one direction. Like you said, they're doing something local, they're using local produce, they're using something, and I always think that that's how most food and drink should be, nurtured. It should go through that process. And that's why I like going from Lark to now, at Waubs. It's such a great move. It's going to be really interesting how that kind of keeps on evolving over the next few years. So it'd be great. Fantastic. I mean, it's a good whiskey. We've got on here, in yabbling away here, it's banana lollies in there, I reckon. You guys losing a lot to the angel share. So much angel share?
Yeah, so up to that sort of 20% mark over the life of the barrel. And it kind of happens really quickly at the beginning. Yeah.
Is that because you're tasting it all the time?
I didn't realise it was a less serious question. Yeah.
Honey on toasted raisin bread, and now getting the saltiness at the end. The brininess is quite balanced. It is not overpowering, which I love. I love that, Jeff. It's great. Osmosis, Paul said. Andrew, with your approach, do you expect significant differences between the different batches of your whiskies?
Yeah, on that front, a couple of things. Yes, there's differences because every cask is different. And so we make reasonably small batches. We try to keep them reasonably consistent over time. But, a lot of work goes into the marriage of these couple of different casks to make up each batch. So the Port Storm that we're about to have, which is largely a tawny port cask, and it's got a little bit of American oak ex-bourbon cask in there. But yes, Rob does marry together several casks to make that up, and is always looking for consistency within the batches. But of course, it's going to be a subtle difference between batches, though not a significant, I would say. The other part to that, though, is that barrel sourcing is becoming harder and harder in Australia and probably globally as well, really. I mean, there's certain barrels like bourbon that's more reliable, of course, but fortified and quality fortified is difficult. And I think that's something to point out here, because over time you might see differences in whiskies from distilleries where they're changing their port barrel from, maybe 5 years ago, it was an actual beautiful port barrel, like a 10, 20-year-old ex, Barossa port, and it was a beautiful, deep, rich kind of barrel. And because maybe they've got bigger, the distillery, and they're forced to use, and combining with the fact they've got bigger and need more barrels, there's less barrels out there. And so they're forced to use seasoned barrels, or they're forced to use, tricks of the trade to try to make them similar. But at the end of the day, they can jeopardize quality by choosing these inferior casks over time. That's something as a craft distillery and a small, distillery that really focuses on quality, that we really focus on that, like our cask selection. Rob's big on that. We don't want to just move into dropping the ball on that cask variety or that cask quality over time. So we'd rather not use a cask and have less stock than, try to make more volume at lesser quality. And, that's such a, when you see a port cask whiskey and you compare, when you think about the comparison between like a 6-month-old port that's been, and maybe the former life was a red wine in that cask and then it had poured for 6 months, versus a barrel that's had poured in it for 20 years. Like, it's chalk and cheese in terms of the quality there. And sometimes the wool can be pulled over the consumer's eyes, I think. And that's something that, as part of our vision from day one, it was like, we've got a high bar and a high quality standard that we want to try to hit. So I think that's something like a little watch out. I think that's a good question from Andrew about like the significant difference between batches. I reckon going forward, and you'll see this in distilleries, that you'll see more significant batch differences from barrel quality dropping.
Right. Yeah. Getting harder to get.
We're lucky enough to have some pretty good suppliers. I've been working in the game a bit now, and knowing these guys and working year on year, we just got another 60 casks from Adelaide yesterday that I've been packing away. All of them, except a few muskets, all of them are tawny and good quality tawny. And a few different wineries. So we do, like we might have in the bond store, we'll have over 10 different wineries that we've got tawnies from, but they're usually on a certain profile. So I'm looking for tawnies that do display that, that nice, rich sultana. It's clearly oxidized properly. It's syrupy. It's not thin. Often when you do imports from internationally, you can really tell the difference between Australian true origin barrels versus international barrel. You can taste it in the whiskey. Well, I can, and we basically aim not to. So at the moment, our stock's looking good, and so the batches I can usually make it all work. You might get one barrel that's not quite to profile, just to make that cut to get into these particular whiskies. So this Port Storm, I'm assuming everyone started. Tim said that it's predominantly tawny, and there's a little bit of bourbon there for balance, and it's a 48%. So we went a little higher there because if you go just above the flocculation point, you can retain a lot of the flavour and a little bit more oils, without going to a full cask strength whiskey. So you get that oil coming through in comparison to the Waubs original, but you also get the much richer sultana. It sort of gets closer to, there's a little bit of brown sugar and sort of pruniness about it as well. And then that bourbon cask, that influence is just for the sweetness, but more so the kitchen spice that just adds complexity to the whiskey. With those sultanas, it can be a little monotone if you just go down the port line and don't do a bourbon influence. But it just depends on what you're aiming for, and this is the Port Storm is what we're aiming for with this profile, just to balance up those sultanas.
This was the one when
Jeff,
George arrived and he started, like, he showed me this one. It was just so, coming up to Christmas, just Christmas in a glass for me. It was that, like, remembering mince pies, remembering some brandy custard. It was just so good. It was like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's such a beautiful nose to it. It's just one that ultimately, if you have something like one of those big Denver and Liley type glasses, you know, and you can pour yourself a good measure, like a 60 ml measure, and you can just get it all opening up and opening up and opening up, and it's like, it's quite an exciting whiskey. You just sit on it, not one you need to talk about either, just kind of just sit there, smell and taste and enjoy, you know, so it's good.
Yeah, this is one of those ones that I think is closest to, say, when I started at back in the day at Overeem. I remember going into the Lark bar and I had one of their distillers selections, and this is the sort of style that was back then. It's that big Christmas pudding, and a lot of the Tasmanian guys do look for that Christmas pudding note. And so within our Port Storm, we wanted to have that hallmark characteristic. And now, what does the maritime characteristic influence this? I think, like what Tim says, where it enhances and just sort of brings a lot of that flavour forward. It sort of like helps cut through sweetness, but sort of develop it at the same time. It just is an addition.
Paul said that it sits comfortably against the Overeem port cask. It's just I like that because the Overeem port cask is one of my favourite whiskies from back in the day, and it still is. And it's one of the inspirations I think out there for a great fortified balanced whiskey, and for a single malt. And yeah, definitely agree. It's a great whiskey. So to be comfortably sitting across along, that's a good thing for me.
Yeah, that's a good comment for me too. I working under Casey back in the day as well. You know, he taught me a lot of things in the early days, and you know, I always have admired the Overeem brand and want to live up to it. So that's nice for me.
Great.
Jeff also said just before that, just asking a question whether we used our casks multiple times. The answer is yes, although we haven't done it much yet because, well, yeah, and there's sort of like two pathways really. You can use it as just a direct refill, second fill, and that is a different whiskey than a first fill. What I like to do is actually use, say, decanted or second fill a pair of casks and bourbon casks to go with a lot of my trial spirits. So with peated or yeast trial work, I like to tone down some of the cask influence. So second fill is actually kind of perfect for that. It doesn't mask all that work I did in the new make spirit, especially peat. That's one that if you mask too much with some big heavy fortified, it just gets lost. That also doesn't pair necessarily well, but with a second fill, a pairer, it's almost like the perfect pairing combination. So I like to use second fills in a slightly different way rather than we just keep slapping it back in until it's worn out. That's actually ties really well into that last question again about the significant differences between batches. There's going to be a lot of distilleries second filling, and so you will see that again, like it'll be, you know, it'll go through a transition where over several years you'll go from first fill to second fill, and there will be a different product. Not necessarily a bad thing, because as Rob was saying, you're going to get a more spirit-driven whiskey potentially, and that can be a better thing if used in the right way. It just needs longer maturation, and treatment of the cask is often a good thing rather than just straight filling it.
Yeah, sometimes I like to use a second fill cask just to take it to the cooper and ask him just to do either like a slow toast, maybe not a char, but just something to caramelize a little bit of actually the whiskey itself. Once, if you, especially within an apera, you can get some really nice tropical notes, like as in Waubs Whisky, apera second fill cask. If you toast that, you get those tropical notes, and you can use that. That's just another bit of another tool to the tool belt. All right, so I think it's time to go for Founders
Yeah.
Reserve.
Yes, I'm excited about this one because this is one of my favorite whiskies, hands down. I mean, it's tricky. They're all favorites. It's a bit like choosing between kids. Rob's gone a bit light on.
Oh, sorry.
You can't have that,
Yeah.
especially after Craig's comment about 60 mil pours before. I was thinking,
it's big gulps of it. That's what you need. There's no sip in this whiskey, I can tell you that much.
So yeah, this is big and oily and it's full bodied. It's 62%. It's right up there. I try to make these to be quite drinkable at 62. So I try and get those oils right up so that it doesn't have that apparent alcohol heat. And if you get the maturity right as well, it's in its favour. But really what Founders Reserve is the best of our tawny stock. So when I'm going through to create any of these whiskies, I've got to categorise every whiskey or barrel in the bond store. And I'm working to some specific things like just, is it mature? Is it not mature? Some real simple stuff, and you can pick that really quickly. Or the next stage is sort of categorizing it into, is there something particular about that whiskey that is unique, or that it's got something that really hits home? So some things might be it has like a really nice and a particularly nice balanced nose or something like that, where it's just sitting right, it's pungent, it's lifted, it's really coming towards you, but maybe that particular barrel has a problem with on the palate. That would be chosen for a different purpose, but the ones that make the Founders Reserve are always the best. And that way you're just it's a quality control thing, really. I think that's why Tim likes it.
Yeah, I mean it's all of our highest performing or most quality port casks at cask strength, and often the feedback that we get is that this is a very juicy and it's a very it's a rich and oily port cask, but yeah, often people are surprised at 62% how sort of it glides over, because it really does sit well on my palate, and I'm always a big fan. It's a memorable whiskey for me. It's got the like sort of long oily finish that I love. I mean, it's very different from our Waubs original, which I also love for different reasons. But if you want a big, heavy, sort of fortified whiskey that's still balanced and still shows spirit, I'm a big fan myself.
Also, really, there's something at high strength tawny casks that you get in Australia, like Australian ports, on the finish in particular. This real butteriness at high strength that you get. I always think of it like, well, our parents, they used to cook Christmas puddings in down underneath the house just before Christmas, and it's this buttered calico sort of flavour. It's hard to describe if you've never had that before, but once you've had it, if it's very much of that that memory for me is just that is in there, and if it's not in there, I'd be upset.
What do you guys think? Is there any comments? Oh, we got George commenting that he said before something about picking the founders over his actual son. It sounds like George had too many whiskeys. And yes, agreed, straight out of the cask. I don't really ever add water myself. People do, and that's totally fine because it's good to experience at different levels, but I never bother. I just love it at this strength myself. Jan and Chris are liking it. That's good to hear.
Chewy, creamy, stewed lolly. Brilliant.
Good description. I like that. Yeah. From Andrew. Which one are starting with friends?
I think maybe A&L have just joined us, and they may be in Queensland where they don't have daylight savings or something.
Ah, yes.
We did did start an hour ago. So we're currently tasting the Founder's Reserve, but we are recording, so you can go back and enjoy it all again with 4 full bottles if you need to as well.
I mean, we are small batch, so we are pretty limited in our stocks. I mean, they've been super well received. We're being requested by a lot of different venues. We're releasing the Waubs Original Batch 5, and you guys, Craig, actually have a past batch. You guys have got a batch that's completely sold out. But even our batch 5, like, we've already sold out. It's not even released. It's till tomorrow, but already our whole Tasmanian allocation is sold out already before we've even released it. It's sort of been grabbed by all the whiskey bars, and it's always been especially that Waubs Original, although they're all in demand, I guess, but the Waubs Original, it's probably started with, back in the day, we auctioned off bottle number 1. I don't know if any of the you guys have been following us this long, but it was our first release. We auctioned off bottle number 1, and it went for $4,800, and it was for a great charity that's all about saving the oceans here down in the reefs, actually, in Tasmania. But ever since that day, I think it's been in hot demand, right? It sort of seems every time we release it, it seems to go really quick. So yes, the Port Storm as well, though, won an award which has sent it to that kind of similar demand territory. It won the a Masters at a competition over in the UK a few months ago, and so that's had its day in the limelight as well recently. So that's our flagship series, the Waubs Original, Port Storm, and the Founder's Reserve. We have those 3 whiskies, and we have new batches coming out kind of constantly. So we're up to about batch 4 or 5, depending on which whiskey. Batch 5 coming out only tomorrow in the Waubs Founder's Reserve. And then on top of that, we're doing limited releases, which is the next whiskey that we'll look at in a minute. Yeah.
With the Founders, then, so it's just full maturation in X20 port casks, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah.
But because we're using port casks literally in all 3 of those, the flagship series, as Rob was saying before, the best port casks, he goes through and rates them all, and the best ones he saves, set aside, reserves, sort of thing. That's what we call it, Founder's Reserve, I guess.
Brilliant.
And yeah, they make the cut for that one.
Sure. Yep. That's great. Yeah, it's a very, very, very good whiskey. Very good. It's I think Scott Tucker said, I wish I could be tasting it, but I'm stuck at work. When you get home, there's always when I get home, watch it back and taste it along with us again. Or it's good. You will be the Australian Springbank. Go, Andrew. Compliment. Well, I don't know if that's a compliment at the moment. You can't get any Springbank.
To be propped up in any of the amongst any of those great Scottish distilleries would be, that's the dream. So that's where we'd love to aim to be, and we're trying our hardest to get there, especially in terms of the quality as such.
I was at all the whiskey shows. I think actually was a whiskey show you were at all year. I got a few, and every show you were at, the table was just mobbed. There was just everybody around the table, and then as they go around the room, standing at another table letting people taste, and always say, every single person always say, what's been your favourite tonight? What have you enjoyed? What kind of style? And like you're talking, 70 to 80% of people would say, "Oh, I love Waubs. It was great." So, and then I think even at the end, the sales were terrific as well for you at the end of them all. So certainly at those shows, it's a standout amongst a big group of whiskies. So it's fantastic. Doing such a good job there, or maybe it's just your personality. Could be that as well.
Probably not that. I mean, when we did start this whole vision to create this maritime Tasmanian whiskey, we did sort of start out by saying, like, if we just do everything 100% genuine and really retain like authenticity and in what we do in quality, and we don't have to make up a story, or so to speak, you know, we don't have to sort of forge marketing type stuff. All we have to do is just tell our story. Like, we just have to take a photo of what's happening on the day out the window, you know, and or what, you know, what's happening in the life of the distillery today, and it's easy, you know, it's sort of job done. So yeah, being genuine and authentic is pretty high on our agenda.
Yeah, it's great. Lovely whiskey. Very good.
Yeah, thank you. Alf was saying there that he had some friends over on Friday and they couldn't believe it was at 62%. Yeah, which is super common with what we get that feedback a lot. Like, people are surprised that it's that high strength.
Yeah,
it does drink well.
I love doing that. When you find those good barrels that drink at high strength, it's just amazing. Especially as well if they, you know, not everyone's into high strength. If you can get it to work well with water, you know, a few drops or even bring it down a long way, you can do that. Usually the quality stands up that it will take water well. So it's one of those things you can have it at any stage, but most of the people that are drinking this is purest stuff. Like, it's no water addition, thank you.
Yeah. And now we're the last whiskey that we have, and this is, so we've only done 2 limited releases today. Who's that? We've done 2 limited releases, and this is the latest one. Only released, it's a month ago, or yeah, about then, maybe even longer now. The limited release, and we called this one the Great Southern Reef. It was actually a release in collaboration with a foundation. They're a charity. They're called the Great Southern Reef Foundation, and those guys are all about preservation of our reefs around Southern Australia, and especially of a focus on saving the giant kelp forests down here in Tassie that literally sit right outside our distillery. And they're a foundation that we've been like friends with for a long time. And actually that Founders Reserve bottle that I said that we auctioned off, bottle number 1, the proceeds went to those guys. And so it was great to collaborate with those guys again with this limited release and name the release after them to try to, you know, raise awareness of what they're up to. And it's all about climate change. Unfortunately, it's all about the fact that the seas are rising in temperature down here in Tasmania. We're seeing the effects, and we're seeing you know, these giant kelp forests. I don't know if anyone here is into diving or has been diving in Tasmania at all, but in the past, even in my time, you know, I'm only youngish, but even in my time, and Rob has done a lot of diving in your degree back in the day, especially. But we have these amazing kelp forests that you get strands come, you know, that are 20 meters high or more. And it's literally like diving within a forest. And unfortunately, these have been demised over the last, you know, couple of decades, but it was really like a tap. It just all of a sudden disappeared a few years ago, largely because of climate change and largely because this long spined sea urchin has been in plague proportion moving in down the coastline and eating all these seaweeds basically. And they're only moving in because the temperature of the water is rising. Anyway, Great Southern Reef Foundation are all about trying to raise awareness and trying to stop this, and you know, doing their part. In fact, they're actually planting a test site right outside our distillery of this giant kelp forest, like this type of kelp that grows. It actually can grow by a half a meter in a day. It's a crazy growth rate. Anyway, I'm getting too far into our sort of personal passion on that side of things. The actual whiskey, though, is it's a bit different for us because it's the first whiskey outside of our flagship series where we're using a sherry cask. So this is in a Pair of sherry, an Australian sherry. We've finished it off after full maturation in a 60-litre sort of size cask. We finished it off in a larger 40-year-old port cask, a tawny port cask, this really beautiful, juicy, aged port cask, and it just gave it this extra, well, different, fortified, obviously, with that port coming through. But yeah, sherry base, and some of the sherry casks that we've used in the past year, which we've hardly ever really released because we don't have much of it. Sherry casks are very hard to get these days in Australia. And, but yeah, this one is that. It's bottled at 43%, so we're taking a major sort of step down, obviously, after just having a 62% whiskey. But yeah, you're going to feel, well, Rob, you can talk to more of the flavour within it.
Yeah, so where I went with this one really is with the Aperas, or the Apera casks like Waubs Aperas, they're usually you get that really nice maltiness and that really big stewed apple coming through, and it's really delicious. And when I found a barrel that was with a 40-year age statement that was sort of had this amazing, real rich syrup-like quality to it, it was from Murray Street, sorry. And when after I put those casks together and I started tasting it, there was this real treacle that came across. So it's like a little darker than the golden syrup, but it's got that little bit of bitterness, but it really, really works with all that sweetness. So like it just balances up that Apera perfectly. It's just really delicious to just sit back and enjoy this one. There's heaps to it if you want to find it, but it's also just easy sipping.
Paul Thompson says he's an ex-diver and mentioned that the kelp forests were on a recent David Attenborough. I have to look that up. I don't think I've seen that one. It's cool.
It's actually learning about what you do in your spare time as well. You know, it's a tough job, running your own business, owning it, and then setting up something new. But the things that you do when you're you try to take a break from all of that, which is probably not often enough. But it's quite very interesting.
Yeah, cheers.
What else is in the local area? Is there anything?
Yeah, so we're we're a little town, a couple of hours away from Launceston and a couple of hours away from Hobart. So we're just in the middle of nowhere, but we're about 1,000 people in the little town here, coastal town. Formerly very much a fishing kind of town. But yeah, it's a beautiful scenic area. You might have, if anyone's been to Tasmania or have heard of Tasmania, you'd know maybe Freycinet or the Wineglass Bay kind of area, Coles Bay. That's just sort of neighbouring us here. It's a bit of a famous landmark and a place to walk.
Yep.
But yeah, it's very much about the raw kind of untouched environment around here. So we've got some of the world's best diving right out front of our distillery here on the back of an island called Governor Island, and it's a rocky kind of outcrop or island that gives a shelter right where our distillery is. Gives a shelter from the wild kind of swells and ocean environment. But on the back of this island, there's some amazing diving, 30+ meter dives right off the edge of the rocks there through canyons and caves, and a lot of different marine life. Like right now, I'm looking at seals sitting all over the rocks over there. I'm looking at about there'd probably be 10,000 crested terns which migrate here. That's actually in our logo on our glass anyway, it's a crested tern. I'm looking at a pelican just standing there over there randomly, which pop up every now and again, and dolphins sometimes cruise through right in front of us. often I'll be looking out of my office window and see whales. It's a really cool, like, that's what we're all here for. There's not sort of like things to do as such. It's all about the environment here and the nature, which is what attracts, the people that live here to it, I think.
Yeah. Somebody said
Oh, yes. Jeff said there, and penguins, yes. There's lots of little fairy penguins. They're only, this high, and they literally living under our distillery, and they're quite a tourist attraction around here.
That's great. Scott says there's sharks as well. Is there sharks?
Well,
Yeah.
There's sharks everywhere in Australia.
Yeah.
It's a part of the distillery that we have that's a little unique is because of the aquaculture licenses for the buildings. We have the salt water intakes, and so the licenses to take salt water, and we use it within our cooling systems. We use heat exchangers in between, so we don't rust out our gear. But we have to go clean the filters. We have to go dive on those lines, and there's big rays out there and stingrays, and they are they're over a metre wide, but then their tails are an extra metre on the back, and there's a pot of like 5 of them, and they come round at the scratchings.
It's one of my favourite times when we have to go diving on these on the intakes to clean the filters off that Rob's talking about for our cooling system in the salt water right in front. Rob, even though he's done a lot of diving, has this fear of stingrays, and it's so funny. It's happened like multiple times because you're down there like scraping with a what's it called? A wire brush. Like you're using a wire brush to scrape the sort of growth on the outside of these filters. And it must be like a mating call for the stingrays or something. And they seem to, or maybe Rob that's got a mating.
I've got the heart.
But I like tap him on the shoulder, and there's this giant bloody stingrays right over his shoulder.
Yeah.
And anyway, that's just a
aside. But it is sort of, it's partly the, a little bit of the production process that's unique, but also just that, like the things that we do on the coast here, like it's very much in our lifestyle. And Tim was talking about the crayfishing. That's legitimate. That's one of the best parts about coming up to Christmas every year. You get the craze for Christmas, and it's a part of, fishing is a part of what we do. We're very coastal people, surfing and whatnot, and it's all about when you coastal live like this, it all just becomes part of your lifestyle.
We've got a couple of people. This is cool. So turns out Jeff has been here to the Lobster Shack. Andrew said I saw earlier as well. He's actually been to the distillery, I believe, and has definitely been to the next door. There's this kind of iconic little seafood place called the Lobster Shack, and he's been to the wineries as well by the look of it. And then Alf as well said he was there here in June in winter, which is a beautiful time of year to be here because there's it's a very still winter actually. It can be wild as hell one day, but it can be really beautifully still and crisp. And it's kind of when it's the quietest in a way, and it's probably one of our favorite times of year. Scott's also been to Bicheno, and Paul was here 7. So everyone seems to know it well, which is good. Yeah, awesome. Scott, I recognise Scott Tucker's name. I believe Scott has had 1 or 2 whiskies of ours before.
Very good. I feel like the only one that's not been there now.
Yeah, well, you
look like
you've been there with that picture in the background. You look like you're sitting on top of it, pretty much.
That's right. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I certainly didn't take that picture. So that everybody knows, with this whiskey here, only place in the mainland right now you can get it is through us. That will change very quickly, I would imagine, but it's available. You get 10% off it as well. I've put a code on there, so that runs for 48 hours. You can order through us, 10% off all Waubs Harbour Whisky, and we'll get it out to you as quickly as possible. And like I said, that Port Storm certainly one that I'll be looking at for Christmas Day. It's just beautiful. It reminds me of all those Christmassy notes. But this is great.
That limited release that you're talking about that we're having right now, we're fully sold out of that everywhere except for the allocation that you guys have got and some other people on the mainland Australia. So it's a batch of 591 bottles. But yeah, we're yes, it's gone. We don't really have any to be able to provide anyone. So that's good news that you guys have got some.
Yeah, yeah. There's a code to use on the Waubs site now. It's for the whiskey company. So if you're purchasing that, code's for the whiskey company site. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it'd be good to come down and I mean, I don't know whether we can choose a cask for our customers, but we get a lot of customers on these tastings, and the next thing they come back to us with is, oh, could we do a peated this cask, that cask, this cask? And you're like, oh my god, you know, like it's what was it? They get quite excited about continually tasting the whiskey and tasting something quite limited. So these limited editions usually are very, very popular when people have tasted obviously new make and went through the whole range. I think I like about this one is that the flavors on it are a bit more, are really pronounced. There's lots of different flavors on it, and because it's that lower ABV, you can sort of get them all on the palate nice and individually. And so it's a really nice whiskey, I think, to just have with friends. You know, some obviously friends that don't drink whiskey, friends that do drink whiskey. It's a bit more sort of open to that on the palate, which I love. You know, it's fantastic. So
Nice. There's a couple of questions here. Just for Scott's question, just about the code. The code Waubs 10 is for the whiskey company site, not our site. We don't have any of the limited release on our site, and in fact, we don't have most of the bottles. We don't even have any availability on our site. You'll find more availability on a whiskey company site than ours, which just seems backwards, but yes, that's the case. The Apsley Alf says was the Apsley collab the only other limited release we did. Yes, that was the first. It was a collaboration limited release with a winery that's very local to us called Apsley Gorge, and they make the best Pinot and highest quality Pinot rated by many in Tasmania. And we did this finish, and it was an amazing collaboration. But yeah, that's well and truly sold out. That was probably 4 months ago when we did that. Which series are we having tonight of the different whiskies? The series that we're having tonight is actually, let me just check just to make sure I get that 100% correct. Which ones you guys have got? You guys have the batch 4 of the Founders Reserve, batch 4 of the Waubs Original, and batch 3 of the Port Storm.
Yep. Absolutely, 100%.
Or is it batch 4? Actually, no, sorry, that might be batch 4 of Port Storm. But yes, pretty much all of that sold out as well. So you'll struggle to get hold of that through us at all. It'll be through the whiskey company, which is cool. Oh, look at this. Hayden has popped a little question. Oh, Scott as well just said he's got some Apsley, but it's not for sale. I like that. Hayden has got a couple of he's thrown in a bottle of something that's very old for us. Before we started releasing our kind of core range whiskies, we did this preview series. We called the Bond 3 preview series, and it was out of smaller casks, and we didn't have much of it. And Hayden's got a bottle. I wonder what bottle that is. Hayden, can you tell us? Because I can't read that. Is that the? It might be the Apera cask strength, and that's a bloody good whiskey. It's really good. I really liked that. It might be. I can just make it out. See if Hayden can, update us.
Are there any bottles that you've released and you loved that you don't have any of left anymore? There are a few.
Yeah, Apera cask. Yeah, Hayden said yes. Yeah, no, that was a really good whiskey. It was at cask strength, and it was just straight Apera sherry, and it was just something about that. Yes, it was some of the early really quality Apera casks that we used to be able to get. So yes, he hasn't even cracked it either by the look of that. Scott said is, are there releases on the Whiskey Company website that aren't available on the Waubs site?
Not yet.
Special
Not
release.
yet.
Oh, no. Don't worry, Scott. If you've got, you said before that you've been collecting every bottle. You're not missing out. You'll hear from us first in terms of new releases and that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Although
George
would suggest an exclusive Whiskey Company bottling next year.
That'll be interesting.
Throw the cheeky little comment like that in.
Definitely.
No, that's a good idea. Maybe we should.
So yeah, I mean, certainly the smaller barrels as well are good because you get a really good selection. And there's not too many bottles from obviously a smaller cask. So you can sneakily put out, a limited edition very, very quickly. So
yeah, we've got another exciting limited edition coming out in February. So watch this space for that. It's been something we've been working on for quite a while.
Yeah.
Andrew just said that, do we have any bottles for sale at the distillery itself? Yes, the answer is yes. We don't have a cellar door as such. We don't have a walk-in style cellar door. We do have tastings though, and we have tours. So we have those daily, but I guess we're a little bit snobby in that way. We don't have a walk-in sort of trying to get every tourist in under the sun. We just have people that want to be here because they like whiskey. So you have to pre-book your tour, pre-book your tasting, which makes for a much nicer, manageable crowd as well. Like you'll be in a tasting with only a few other people often, or on a tour with only 4 or 5 or whatever other people, which is makes for a bit more of an intimate setting. And then at the end in our tasting room, which we're in right now, we've got an area where we keep stock here for sure of releases, so that we make sure that nothing worse than coming all the way to the actual distillery and then getting to the end and not being able to purchase your favorite whiskey. So we try to be pretty well stocked with old stuff here. Pedro has slotted in. He's getting deep. Pedro's getting laid on here about yeast experiments.
This is right up my alley, though. Are they single-use cultures, or how are you maintaining your valuable strains? Yeah, I use like a yeast bank basically. So I do long-term storage through. I make slants. They're sort of like a test tube where you get the agar to set on its side, so you get a nice angle to it, and then you take your single colony and you streak it and push it into it, and then put it in the incubator, let it grow out, and then put it into the cold store. So I basically, anything that I think's worth keeping, I have in the cold store. And you kind of need to go back to that and sort of try and like reinvigorate them every 6 months or so. Make sure everything's okay, because you don't want to lose something. It's challenging because the more times you do sort of like any transfer from a streak plate to another tube or cold store, you kind of increase the chances of mutation, so the yeast can change. But I do what I do to keep them nice and original culture. So I'll keep the very, very beginning house strain, and then make subsequent kind of like 2nd generation, 3rd generation yeast strain cultures as well. The analysis to determine the species of the wild yeast, I don't use any analysis there in terms of trying to figure out what it is. I have a gut feel on. So most of the yeast strains are, if you're going to find a yeast strain, say next to a winery, you kind of know what it's going to be. Or if you find it just outside of the distillery, you know what it is. It's either a locally adapted yeast that is from a source like the bakery or something like where there are lots of sugars about. But I don't go to the DNA sequencing stage of trying to figure out what exactly they are. I'm looking for flavour and yield, really. So like some yeasts have great flavour but very low yield and not commercially viable, and some are the other way around. And you're really looking for the Goldilocks in there, where it's like you're getting good yield and you're getting a unique flavour that you can bring across. Mouthfeel is another thing that you might be chasing. And I typically don't use combination yeasts like M1 with another yeast, because there's competitive stresses on each of those yeasts, and sometimes it doesn't work, especially if one outcompetes the other significantly. You just won't get the result you want. Sometimes I like to do it where I use yeasts in new make spirit and blend the new make spirits post sort of distillation, as opposed to trying to blend them in the fermentation, because of the, one feeds on the other's nutrients or whatever it be. They kind of get a bit mixed up. The stresses that I'm putting them through, usually it's so there's a couple of different ones, but you can use, temperature is the king really. So it's like either fermentation temperatures, or it might be I like to do extraction temperature changes as well within the mash, so that you get different sugar compositions. But really it's all about stressing the yeast so that you're creating the flavor profile you want, because one yeast, one strain, if you change the degrees at the beginning, say at the pitch point from say 20 degrees to 25 degrees, and then also track the profile, if you choose to change that, but just those starting points, you'll get a different new make spirit. So if you've got to find the right thing for what you want. So it's about getting a yeast strain and then manipulating it to find a brewing pathway that you're comfortable with, then on the small scale, but then you take to the big scale. And yeah, ester production, high temperatures is often is that. But the other thing I didn't talk about is sugar concentrations and pH. So again, you get massive differences in the new make spirit styles. It's pretty much pretty standard for me to use something between 16 and 18 in bricks. I want to say specific gravity, but basically I use that measurement to I can do water additions to bring it down to 15, and that will make a difference again. So it just depends on what you want to do there. The other part that is interesting is with all of our single malt whiskey beer production, it's basically because we're not doing a boil like say a brewery would. It's more of a traditional normal way to make single malt whiskey is not to do a boil. So you get across a lot of bacteria that comes with the product, and that changes a lot in a long ferment. So fermentation times is another thing that you can manipulate to get a different flavour. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to take this offline, Pedro. People are starting to delays over here.
That's all right. Yeah. We'll do that. What we'll do is we can finish up. We can stay online for 5-10 minutes. If you get any more questions, obviously feel free to stick around to answer them. And at home, if you're interested in listening, take the next 10 minutes or so to listen to those answers to those questions. I'd just like to thank you both for your time tonight. It's been wonderful. It's a great story. It's great whiskey, and we can't wait to see what happens in the future, and how the company evolves and the whiskey evolves. It's great.
Awesome. Thanks, Craig, and thanks to the whiskey company, and thanks to all you guys. It's been fun. Chatting whiskey.
Definitely. Thanks to everybody that joined us tonight. We will have one more tasting before Christmas. We're doing a signatory vintage one in 2 weeks' time, and some cask strength whiskies. And then in the new year, we've got Loch Lee Distillery from Scotland, now one of the only distilleries in the world who are barley to bottle. So the yeast strains, the barrels, the barley, everything is done on site. And and it's also got its head distiller, John Campbell from Laphroaig, who will be joining us to go through 6 of their whiskies, which are just about to land in the country in the next couple of weeks. So that'll be exciting. And then hopefully we'll get these guys back again, maybe in February, because this class did sell out pretty quickly. So we might do another one February, March, when a new limited release comes out. and then go back into it again then. But this will be recorded, so if you need to go back and recite anything that we've tonight spoken about, you're obviously welcome to visit our YouTube channel. But thanks everybody again, and good night.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Thank
See ya.
you.